Welcome everybody to Waka Voyaging today. My name's Peter Richardson. I'm the content coordinator for the Symposium.
Relax.
And also for the We Are the Ocean event, which is on Friday night, which I hope some of you were able to attend. Can you hear me okay? All right. Sorry?
Like you're going to eat it.
Okay. Yeah, okay. All right, I hope that's better. Oh, yes, it is, yes. Okay, so could I introduce the panel? On my immediate right is Mef Wyeth. Her actual name is Heu'ionalani Wyeth from Hawaii. And to her right is Mimi George. Both Heu and Mimi are from Pacific Tradition Society, which has worked for many years to promote and support traditional voyaging and canoe construction in Taumako, which is a Polynesian outlier in the Solomon Islands. Mimi sailed with David Lewis, who many of you would know, a famous figure in Pacific voyaging tradition. To their right is Darienne Dey, who is a student of Voyaging traditional navigation in Micronesia and a crew member of Polynesian Voyaging Society craft, including Hoturoa, which is well known to many of you, I'm sure. To her right is Alison Kellen, who's the director of Wan Ailon in Majel, which is translated as Canoes of the Marshall Islands, known by the acronym WAM. Alison has a very varied background. He's been mayor of Bikini Atoll. He's a member of various government groups in the Marshall Islands and a key figure in development work in the Marshall Islands that revolves around boat building and teaching of traditional skills. And to his right is Hoturoa Barclay-Kerr. Hoturoa is lives and breathes Waka, is how he describes himself. He's the skipper, captain of a number of ocean-going Waka canoes in New Zealand. He's an orator, and his marae is on the lands that his ancestral canoe arrived at, and the name of the master of that boat back at the time the original settlement of New Zealand by Maori was named Hoturoa. So he comes from a distinguished line of forebears, all of whom were voyagers. So we're incredibly pleased to have such a stellar panel to talk about the subject of Waka voyaging. We'd like to start by and whoever on the panel would like to respond to this, we'd like to just talk about what it's like to sail on a Waka. These boats do not look like conventional Western craft. They vary, of course, around the Pacific, and some of you may have heard Mimi's presentation earlier today about tupuke, which are the craft built in Taumako, using totally traditional materials and techniques. Hoturoa, of course, is a fiberglass boat, but it replicates the whole shape and sail design and so on of traditional Hawaiian voyaging canoes. So there's diversity, but would anybody like to just talk about what it's like to actually physically sail a Waka?
Kia ora tātou. Mehne ki tō tātou whare, ki te rangi, ki te whenua, ki ngā iwi taketake o tēnei wāhi ki o tātou tūpuna. Just very briefly, I just thank the ancestors of this land for letting us be here. And what's it like to voyage today? For us, there's lots of bureaucracy because our Waka challenges our government regulatory powers that govern how we what you should do and how you should go sailing if you leave your country and go to sail somewhere else. And so there's a whole lot of there's people who've never been on the Waka who have a set of rules based on modern day yachts and everything else, and then they have a hard time trying to figure out how to comply our vessels to fit or put these square pegs in the round holes that they've got. And so it's been quite a long process, but we've got a relationship with them, and we have a number of our experts who are consulted by the New Zealand Maritime Authority that's starting to create the kinds of things that makes it a bit easier for them to understand. So, for instance, we've been doing these projects up in Vanuatu, and when Maritime New Zealand heard that we were doing these projects, they said, you need to have this type of commercial, you need to go through a commercial registration and compliance program for your vessel. So it's okay, send us all the stuff you want us to do and we'll do it. So we did that. We had to fly a surveyor up to Vanuatu, and he had to check everything off. We did everything that they told us. We submitted all the papers, and we said, can we have our certification now? And they said, well, we really sent you that because we still didn't really know how we were going to do this. So even though we got to that point where we'd complied to everything with the inspection by the surveyor, we still couldn't do it because they still decided that maybe this isn't what we should be doing, and hang around and we'll come up with some more plans for you to try and do it some other way. So there's a lot of bureaucracy, but it's like that for us because we do a lot of these things with school kids and everything like that, and everyone's pretty risk averse, and I think they in a lot of people's minds, they've been trapped in their idea of what a canoe is, which is, for us, the word waka means a boat. And all of your idea of a boat suddenly creates this huge world of different vessels that are used to carry people and cart gear and everything else. But as soon as you talk about canoes, the thing that pops up into most people's minds is this long, skinny thing pointy at both ends, and you paddle them around most of the time. And then those are the kinds of things that we have to try and deal with. We can say to them, come and have a look at it. Come and see what it looks like, then you'll get an understanding of what we're talking about. Oh, we've seen one canoe, we've seen them, all kind of issues that we have to deal with. And so, waka for us can be a small canoe, it could be a big sailing vessel, it can be an airplane these days, it can be a car, it's something that transports people. And so these are all the little things that make it a little bit more interesting for us. So we can't just, and I think people thought it was like this in the old days. I think they thought that our ancestors just sat on the beach one day and went, oh, let's go and sail out there for 2 or 3 weeks and just see what it's like. There's actually quite a lot of planning and thinking that goes into going out on voyages on our Waka. And I think it's just a long, I'll say, battle for us to do it. I remember the first time we went off on a long, big voyage from Aotearoa, we had people waiting on the beach crying because they thought they were never going to see us again. Because they've been so hammered by how risky and how unprepared our ancestors were when they went to do this kind of stuff. And then when we turned up alive on the other end of the trip, everyone's really surprised. So I suppose in a nutshell, there's a lot of bureaucracy that makes it a lot harder than back in the old days.
That's not the answer I expected. But, and I know it's true. Mimi was talking about that this morning, about the fact that traditionally in Taumako, people would be out on the boats at an early, young age. And now I think Hokulea, you can't even go on it until you're 18.
Well,
Darienne, do you want to talk about how you got into voyaging?
now I do. Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Hotu. Yeah, so for crew members for Hokulea, just for liability reasons, for deep sea voyages, you have to be at least 18 years old, but that doesn't mean you can't train in the time before that. And we certainly have a lot of smaller Waka or Wa'a that are perfectly suited proportionally for smaller sailors, and then eventually can graduate to sailing on one of our deep sea canoes when they're of the right age and size. Although it does pay to be smaller because it is your space is very limited on our Wa'a, and you can't be too claustrophobic because you're very enclosed, even on like Haunui and other Waka. I guess I got involved through being an educator, and there's a big push to involve teachers to extend the reach of the Wa'a, so that if you can't otherwise crew, maybe if you're a teacher and they train you, then you can bring that experience back into your classroom, either literally through connecting with the students from the deck of the Wa'a, through sat phone or through other communications, or once you're back, you can share, do presentations and also work that into your curriculum. So I was a math teacher at the time, and then I was like, there's an opportunity to meet Hokulea. I've never seen her before. And for those who came to the presentation, I showed that she was in pieces when I met her. She was on land. It wasn't like this, the type of thing you see in the newspaper. And, but it was nonetheless magical. It was electric getting to just be in her presence, and I didn't know what that would lead to. I didn't know if that would be the only time. And fast forward later, and I got to meet all these guys through Hokulea. So certainly that's where I started, but that's not where I'm necessarily only ending. And so I've been really grateful to get to meet all these guys and hopefully learn from them. And but being on board the Wa'a is great, and eventually I think everybody's a Wa'a person deep down inside. I mean, we've got sailors filling the room, but for a lot of us in Hawaii, we come to the Wa'a just out of a cultural motivation. We're like, we want to connect with our ancestors, we want to feel Hawaiian, and then we get on board and we're like, wait, what do we do? Which way is the front? What are we doing? And so we have to learn how to sail, and then we have a deeper appreciation for all these rich maritime cultures, both throughout the Pacific and even along, like the Eastern Seaboard. When Hokulea went to New York and went to Virginia and Naval Academy, everybody was just like, whoa, everybody's super into sailing here in the ocean. And it's like, yeah, there's a lot of people who are into sailing, but we only take an interest later, but via our canoes. And it's great. Takes me back to it makes me feel like a little kid again, 3 sets of clothing, just gotta not fall off the canoe and get to climb on the monkey bars, climb all over the deck and the mast. It's great, it's liberating, it tests you, and we're a lot more exposed maybe than on certain other vessels, and certainly on Marshallese canoes and proa from Micronesia, you're very exposed. Hokulea and Heu'ionalani and the other Waka, they're kind of they're cushy, and then certainly Taumako Wa'a too. You guys are very exposed. It is like camping on the ocean, but yeah, we're very protected, and we feel safe because we're with our mother Wa'a. She's the vessel that carries us, just like our mothers once carried us. So she keeps us safe.
So this is probably a question for either, well, it might be for all of you, Alison and Mimi and Heui. You have spent time, Alison, you're from a community where canoes and voyaging are an integral part of everyday life. They're essential for communication. What's that like for your community, or Mimi and Hui, in your case, the community you've worked with? What role does voyaging play in their lives?
Well, I think in the Marshall Islands, we call it Wa instead of Waka. It's a bit different. First of all, I had the privilege to be a crew on Makali'i from the Hawaiian Islands from Micronesia. First leg was 2,700 miles. I don't know what that in kilometer. And I've also been, lucky to be part of the canoeing culture in the Marshalls. And there's two different worlds in a way. So when we were preparing to sail from Hawaii through Micronesia, you have to follow, just like Utu was explaining, the process. We, every once in a while, would jump inside the swimming pool and make sure that we all are fit to take the sail, the voyage. But when it comes to the Marshall Islands, canoeing is part of our life. So, of course, when I first went on a voyage from one side of the Marshalls to the other side, to the eastern side, Majuro, we had no life jacket. There was no radio communication on the canoe. We know that we'll be there in a day or two. That's kind of like how we did it. You know, never. See, the canoe, like I said, the canoe is us. That's how we survive. The canoe is a tool for sustainable livelihood. So if your family want to live, you have to know how to build a canoe and sail the canoe. So that voyage that we went from, my first experience on a Marshallese canoe, I thought that was kind of like camping on the water. We didn't even talk about life jackets or if this ever go underwater or what's going to happen. We always have that in mind, that this is a floating device. It's all made out of wood, never sink. We all know how to swim. Safety wasn't really a concern, but we went, we took the voyage, and I think that's the difference between our way of canoeing, voyaging, because we do that every day. So it's nothing different. But I have a school. I run a school now because the school is also funded by different countries. Then I have to follow their laws, their standard, when I build a canoe. But then when I'm in the water, it's a totally different world. You know, I just, okay, they're not going to see it. Let's just go. They tell me to stop. Oh, there's a lot, you know, there's a small boat warning. There's going to be a lot of wind. Well, get that attitude that this is a floating device. It's not going to sink. Just go. And if you get lost, you'll find another island somewhere. But it's, you know, it's a totally different world when you're part of the Western standard and part of the traditional standard. This, you know, we have no policies. We just go whenever, you know. When I was young, my grandparents, my parents, when they don't see the canoe on the beach, they said, "Oh, Alson probably took off." They didn't call anybody and says, "Did you see my son?" Yeah, so that's probably the difference.
Mimi, what's it like in Taumako, which is, I should explain, it's a Polynesian-speaking island in the east of the Solomon Islands, and I guess the fact that people there speak a Polynesian language is a whole voyaging story behind that. But what's it like there? Does everybody grow up expecting to learn voyaging, or is it restricted to certain families, or, you know, just boys? How does it work?
No, every person, every child wants urgently and desperately to get on a va'a as soon as possible. But what I'm reminded of, as you folks, you know, were explaining, in Taumako, until about 8 years ago, there was no government or policy that was preventing children from going out on the vessels. But then it started up. The plan was for Te Puke to sail from Taumako to Vanuatu and renew that route. And so they had to have, all of a sudden there had to be an escort vessel. The time for that voyage is November, December, or maybe March. So when there are north and west winds, and west mostly. So that's a time when, I mean, there are no shipping services. You know, there is no modern vessel even to today based in, you know, within 500 miles. So there had to be an escort vessel, and the normal escort vessel since that time is a 21-foot fiberglass dinghy with a 40-horse outboard on it. So who's going to sink first, the tepuke or the dinghy? And who's going to save whom? But that's the craziness. Now, one other thing you reminded me of is, you know, we were trying to, the Vanuatu Cultural Center, you know, was inviting, collaborating with the whole plan for people to reunite. We had there were Taumako family members who went to Vanuatu a little bit after World War II and never were able to get back. The borders closed, etc. So there was to be a reunion. There were to be reunions, and so we kept asking, you know, are there any, you know, what do we have to do? And we kept getting no answers, or we kept getting really complicated big boat commercial answers, which are ridiculous. And so what ended up at the very last minute, on the sat phone, a decision came, and that was from somebody who'd just come in, you know, to the Vanuatu Maritime Authority and the customs, and they had decided that, yes, you can come, but your vessel, not only can it not come ashore because it's wooden or, you know, made of many plants, like about 60 different plants, and you might be carrying bugs and stuff like that. So, but when you get off the vessel, we're going to have to burn it to make sure it you know, nothing. So there you go. We didn't make the voyage all the way. I mean, we were going to, well, anyway, the winds changed. Anyway, that's another difficulty. But really, the main difficulty is just what these two have been saying, is this just ridiculous situation. And the irony in Taumako is that the leader of the Holau Waka Taumako Association, their own voyaging school organization, is retired from being in the maritime police. And he was the one who led the current institution of Solomon Islands Maritime Authority, the rules, the protocols, the safety regs, the international collaboration. He helped set all that up. He was in Australia many, many times, training and coordinating all this stuff. And then he quit and went home to do what his grandfather, Kavea, wanted him to do, which was to lead the school. So it's right in, you know, he hired all those people who are now saying, you have to do this, you have to do that. And you have to have an escort vessel, and so you have this crazy solution of an outboard on a 20-foot dinghy.
So a number of the panel, maybe all of the panel, have done long-distance voyaging without conventional Western navigational instruments, sometimes without any, and sometimes just primarily relying on traditional ways of wayfinding on the ocean. Let's talk about that, because I think it's something that interests a lot of people in the audience. And from my point of view, I think it's something that can often supplement modern navigational techniques. If you have an awareness of the wayfaring signs around you, it makes your own navigation safer and easier. Maybe start with Hotu, because I know you spoke about it the other night. Do you want to just give us a sense of how you find your way around on those long voyages?
I guess one of the things that, to give you a little picture of the kind of things that we do, is that often when we're training someone in navigation, I'll have someone who has modern day electronic ways of positioning us, but they're kind of sworn to secrecy. They are the ones that sit there and they're plotting what the GPS positions, coordinates might be for the duration of a journey. And then whoever's navigating traditionally, they're going to, as they're going along, they'll do their estimated positions in their little notebook. And then at the end of the trip, the person who's been sworn to secrecy and the navigator sit down, and then they just have a look at how close or how far apart those things, because we do these estimates at 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. And so then we just collect all that and do that. So that's just to give you an idea how, in terms of trying to train people, that's one of the ways that we do it. And part of that also goes back to that talk that I had at the beginning, is that we're not really allowed to leave the coastal waters unless we have that stuff on board anyway. We actually we have to comply with the safety regulations that Maritime New Zealand has put in place for any vessel departing. So the best way for us is to just say, yes, we've got that stuff, and one person is the only person on board that uses it. It just very quickly, I guess, those of you who might have come down to the tent would have got a little bit of a taste of what happens, but I guess one of the most important things for the initial instruction of our trainee navigators is that we have the system of separating the horizon into a bunch of little segments that goes right around in a big circle. It just goes around the horizon. They're for us, and I think it's the same systems that we all kind of use, is that each one of us has our own little way of measuring how big that segment is on the horizon. And but you have to be consistent in the way that you measure it. I can't sit here and go like this, and then go like that, and it's over there, because it'll be quite a variation. So I have to always keep telling you, you've got to do it the same way, all the way around. And then these segments all around the horizon we call them houses, and stars live in these houses. And so all around the horizon, you start learning what stars live in what houses. And their rising and setting points are really, really powerful direction indicators. And so say for instance, I was trying to sail straight up to Hawaii from
Hobart.
Well, yeah, that's going to take ages because we've got to go right around New Zealand and everything else. But well, say for instance, I was wanting to go to Vanuatu from Aotearoa, which is kind of north, right? So I would be wanting to try and sail probably just a house or two away from north. So part of my planning for that trip and training with our navigators, you start to know what are the stars that you need to look at to keep you oriented in that direction. So if you think about it, the canoe is kind of like the needle on a compass, and you aim your needle just away from or to these segments that you want to, and it's all these stars around you that I guess you look at it relative to the canoe to put you in a reasonable good direction. So I'll stop there because I think there's other ways that our family over here have that complement the stuff that I've just been talking to you about, because it's not just about stars, it's about a whole lot of other things as well.
Alison, do you want to pick that up? Because the Marshall Islands are famous for the stick charts that are used as navigational aids. Does what Hotu is saying sound familiar in the same system you use, and what differences are there?
Well, it's kind of combination of, we do combination of the stars and also the swells, but mostly the swells. It's funny, when I first went with these navigators on the Voyaging canoe, we were just sitting there and he was explaining the way the islands are, and just like, okay, you feel it? Like, feel what? That was the northern swells. Oh, okay. Keep saying that, and of course, we're in the middle of the ocean, you see the wind waves and all those confusing things. I understand it. But after a while, I was the lucky one, so I was the one with the rudder, so I cannot go to sleep. And anyway, the way they do it is mostly they feel the swells from the north, south, east, and west. When you're probably in that part of the ocean, I'm not really familiar with this other part of the ocean, but in that part of the ocean, you can actually feel the eastern swells. It's a lot, you can feel it a lot bigger than the northern swells, and then the southern swells is less, and the western swell is you don't feel it that much. But knowing the swells, then you also learn the reflection of the swells that hit the islands and come back. Because you actually, the thing about the Marshallese is they have the stick charts, which is the map of the island, all the atolls together. So once you memorize that, you kind of, when you close your eyes, you kind of know where the islands are because you feel the swells. And of course, we use the southern star. I use mostly the southern star because when I sail, I look back. I don't look forward. I look back and said, okay, that's where we're going. And by feeling that, by knowing that this is south, and you know where the swells comes from, you kind of, kind of know where you are in the middle of the ocean. But then when you know where you are, by learning the sticks, the map, you know where the atolls are. So when you go, you feel the reflection of each of the atolls. But there's a lot of other navigators in the Marshalls. Like my cousin was using both. So he was using the stars and the swells. There are, now there are other navigators who are teaching the same swell patterns instead of the stars. So the stars is used, but not as like Otu is explaining how they use the segment of the sky.
So Alison has an example of one of those stick charts down at the Pacific Seafarers Precinct the tent that's got displays by Pacific Traditions and by Alson and Hotu's organisations as well. So if you want to know more about those, go and have a look and have a chat to them about that. Mimi has written an incredible paper about a strange phenomenon, maybe not strange to Pacific Islanders, strange to us perhaps, called tilapa. Mimi, would you like to explain what tilapa is and how it's used for navigation?
Well, I can explain that Tealiki Kavea and others from quite a few other islands have explained that it's a sign. It's an ancestor sending you the sign, the light. It's an ancestor in itself. And if you need it and you ask for it, or if the ancestor thinks you need it, it will be sent. So what you see, there's variation, but when you're out at sea, there's a faint, sharp, quick light, like turning if you could turn a flashlight on and off super quickly, coming directly from islands or reefs. And if you...
Underwater?
No, it's not underwater.
Okay.
David wrote that. David Lewis wrote that, and I know why he wrote it, because when we were in the Solomons in 1993, he explained to me where he saw it. And yes, it is tilapa, but it's reef tilapa. That was a deep reef coming close to the reef islands. There's a distinction between the deep reef or reef island lapa and the deep sea lapa. The deep sea lapa you see it travels on the surface. Now that doesn't mean that you can't see reflections of it or light coming from that surface down a meter or so. When it's really clear, that happens. But the main light is coming on the surface, and it's coming basically in a straight line, very fast. It can be dim. It has what come to learn as you study with someone, as someone trains you in it, you learn that there are different tints, different colors that are associated with the lapa that comes from different islands has. And there's slight variations in the shape. And also the width and appearance of it varies depending on whether you are very close to the island or whether you are very far from the island. David wrote that it was, I think he wrote 20 to max of 80 kilometers. Or was it 80 miles? 80 miles. But he was mainly talking about 20 to 30 miles from the island. And no, I've seen it at over 150 miles from the source. And I know of accounts, very reliable accounts of it being 200 miles from the source. But it takes training, and so I'm sure that Hotu has seen it. He's been out there enough, and Alson.
And what about birds? How are they used in navigation?
What about what?
Birds.
It's one of many phenomena that are part of this whole traditional navigational system. You have to know the behavior of birds. You know, say, a certain bird will leave the island at dawn, go out and fish all day and return at dusk. Another one might leave at dusk and go out and return at dawn, and you better know which one is which, or you might go off in the wrong direction if you try to follow the path of that particular bird. And then, as well as diurnal and nocturnal migrations, there are seasonal migrants. One of the oral traditions about the discovery of Hawaii by people in the Marquesas and Tahiti concerns the behavior of Pluvialis fulva, the Pacific golden plover, or as we in Hawaii call it, the kolea. Kolea are not water birds. If they land on the ocean, they will probably drown because they don't have the kind of waterproofing that, say, ducks and gulls and other truly pelagic birds do. And they come and they spend the winter in Hawaii, further south in Tahiti. They always come from the same direction. They breed in the Arctic. So in Hawaii, it's around May or late April. The kolea will get together in big flocks and they will take off as soon as a good southwesterly wind comes to propel them along and head for North America. And then they return 6 or 7 months later. So people would observe the seasonal migrations of these particular birds, and they knew there had to be land up in that direction because these birds could not land on the water, and they did not breed in Hawaii and Tahiti. They simply came down and ate and then went back up someplace else to breed. So the oral tradition is that certain people decided, let's follow them and see where this land is. And so they found Hawaii. There's very tenuous evidence that they might have made North America by following along the same track, but an awful lot of what is quoted as evidence for that is simply wishful thinking. But birds are extremely important.
And as Hotu said the other night, not advisable to follow an albatross, as you might end. Let's talk about what life's like on a voyaging waka. I mean, they're not like European yachts. Is leadership, I think this is probably a question for Hotu because he's captained a number of these waka on a number of long voyages, and maybe also Darienne to talk about your experience as a crew member. But what's leadership and teamwork like on a boat? Because anybody who's been on a long voyage knows that the human interactions on the boat are as important as, you know, the systems and navigation.
Well, a lot of you who have sailed, and you know, probably quite a lot of you have sailed with, and at the end of a voyage thought, I don't want that person on my vessel anymore. We actually spend quite a bit of time sailing with people and in training to I guess learn what they're like, how their capabilities are in terms of working with everybody else, making sure that the canoe and the crew are their priority. You know, I was interviewed once after one of the trips for a program back in New Zealand, and someone said, you know, these voyages, they require people who are pretty fit. They require, you know, a whole lot of these physical attributes. So what do you do? You know, because they saw my crew and they didn't look like they were the fittest, strongest people in the world. And I said, well, the thing is that for me, if someone comes and they're really, really fit and strong and all the things that you might want to have in what your ideal crew member might be, but if they're not compassionate, if they don't show any empathy, if they're selfish and all these other kind of things, it's pretty hard to train that kind of stuff out of somebody. So if I have someone who has all those qualities that makes them, you know, all these things that I just spoke about, I know how to make them stronger. I know how to make them or I know how to teach them how to swim a long way. I can do all these other things. It's way easier for me to do that with someone who's already loaded with all these good qualities than to try and do it the other way around. Because those are the kind of people that I know will, you know, when we need them to be on watch, they're not going to complain, they're just going to get there. You know, I know, you know, a really classic example was we did a trip to Norfolk Island from Auckland just before COVID. And this one person, we got sucked in because this one person we thought actually had all the stuff that we wanted. They did a really good couple of weeks with us when we were going through that sort of selection process. But once we got sailing, some clone of that person got on the Waka. And it's the first time in my whole life that by 24 hours, every single person on the Waka did not want to have anything to do with that person. And it only took 24 hours. It was only a 5-day trip, but I had to put that person on a plane and fly them back to New Zealand because everybody was just over it. You know, and that was my fault because I didn't, I thought the kind of things that we were wanting were exhibited. I think it's just that person just wanted so hard to try and do it. They went out of character for a couple of weeks while we were going through all our things. And I guess it's all about being able to work together and understand that, you know, your priority moves away from you as an individual to firstly your canoe and then the crew and everything else, and having full, I guess, faith in your navigator and the captain of your canoe, and just following all those kinds of things. Because this person I'm telling you about, because I was training we're doing a bit of navigation training too, and so I had a couple of young fellas doing the navigation. And one of them, I was sitting right there, and the navigator says to me, I think we go that way. I said, well, if that's what you think, we're going. And so he tells this person, I want to steer the canoe more up that way. And this person goes, are you sure? You know, those kinds of, and that was the start of this downhill journey of the relationship between that person and the rest of the crew.
I have to apologise, we've run over time, but I think we've got time for a couple of very quick questions. So if people in the audience have questions, keep them short, please, and we'll get a mic to you as quickly as we can, and try and steal 5 minutes from the time, or I might be told off for doing that. Oh, I'm sorry. I developed this program and I'd forgotten that we've got an hour and a half. We've got plenty of time for questions. So sorry, just too much on. We've got 30, we've got extra time. I'm sorry. I had forgotten the program that I developed. So we do have extra time. Let's throw to Darienne and her experience as a crew member. You know, and just as background, I don't know whether I should say this, Darienne, but some of the early trips that Hoturoa made, there were serious tensions between the crew on the boat, to the point that Mau Pielug, who was the Micronesian navigator who advised that trip, said, I'm not, you know, a bit like what Hotu was saying, I'm not voyaging with you guys again. And he came back and assisted the Polynesian Voyaging Society after they'd had a canoe capsize and I think 1 or 2 people die. He came back and assisted them, but there were serious issues to be addressed in terms of crew dynamics. So that was before Darienne's time on the boat. But Darienne, what's been your experience on the PBS Waka?
Well, as long as there's people on a va'a, there's going to be drama. It's kind of inherent. I've had, really great experiences. I guess they're all great experiences. I've been on, let's see. Well, the number doesn't matter, but I've had experiences with great leadership. I've had great examples, but I mean, no matter who's been on board, it's provided great examples for me to pick and choose. I want to be more like that crew member, or, oh gosh, I don't want to, that's clearly not the way I want to be. Because again, coming to this as a non-sailor initially, and eventually, learning every time, I just learned that, it's basically the best you can do is to be, come with good qualities, be someone that people can work with. And I think that's how I got selected for my first deep sea voyage, which was on Heu'ionalani when she was brand new. She was constructed in Aotearoa, and they sailed her up from there to Tahiti, and then I jumped on in Tahiti. And although I hadn't, the longest voyage or sail I'd been on up until that point was just overnight between Oahu and Kauai. And although you do lose sight of, you can potentially lose sight of Oahu, and then Kauai comes into view. All of our other islands in Hawaii are, at least the inhabited ones by humans, are intervisible. So I didn't have any real experience with losing sight of land, and certainly not for more than a day, or more than a couple of hours. So that trip was 17 days, and we encountered a storm. And every time my captain talks about that, the storm, is 40 knot winds, 50 knot winds, like the numbers always increase. It felt crazy because I'd never been deep sea before, and that was my first storm. But now it's like I always compare when we have squalls or other storms to that, and I'm like, was it as bad as that? And it's like, well, I don't know. I don't know if it's ever been as bad as that, or if it's just me, being excited for the challenge. Because we feel very safe on our canoes; they won't sink now the way they've been retrofitted. But I guess there's always people kind of discovering who they are out there at sea, and maybe we've all done that at some point, and we continue to do that, where maybe you're a leader or the head of a family, or you're used to running the show on land, and then you get into the ocean, and although you maybe are doing your best to be a team player, we can't help sometimes but revert to whatever we're used to. And so maybe, in times of weakness, maybe you're a little bit less communicative in positive or productive ways. And it's all, but it's, like Hotu was saying, and as everybody can attest, it's all about that trust. You become a family when you're on board, and that is your world. Your number one priority is to not leave the canoe. Don't go overboard. And you have to make sure that everybody stays on board as well. And I mean, now, and again, the kind of sailing that I do with Polynesian Voyaging Society is largely recreational. We don't have, in some ways we have to sail, from a spiritual and cultural perspective, but in terms of feasibility, like we'll have food either way, we'll have a fresh gene pool of people to marry on our island. But so the navigational position, the role of wayfinder is different than it once was. And that's one thing, along with various aspects of our repertoire beyond just the stars and the swells and the winds. We want to be able to, we're looking to regain our, in Voyaging, they would call it pukof, which is the sea marks, how to use animals and how to use different maybe metaphysical things that happen, phenomena that happen out there, te lapa. I don't know if we had that, I don't know, well, you saw that on Maui, right? Te lapa. Yeah. So it's like, off of Maui. There's many things that we have yet to regain, and it's through kind of connecting and tapping into something deeper, rather than just the exercise of, can I measure things and get from point A to point B? It's like, who can I tap into? What can I tap into that's both within me and also out there? And so, I feel like that's one thing we can get back, especially whether you're actively the one whose responsibility it is to navigate on a particular voyage, because we take turns, or you're a crew member, because you can always be still navigating. You just may not be making the calls of which way we're going to turn. You still have to be sharp on your stars and all of your phenomena. But a focus more on just navigation, wayfinding, it's life. It's for the preservation of life. It's to go and, it was originally for all of our ancestors, a way to go and get sustenance, and you have to ensure everybody gets there on, in one piece. And so that's something that we can always emphasize, along with like trying to sharpen our skills as sailors, as wayfinders, but just being better people to each other. And that's one cool outcome I've noticed too among lots of the far mass majority of crewmates is that, they come back and they're just better people in the lives of their families and their friends and everyone around them. And I think I've had some conversations with folks about how, again, not having grown up as a sailor, I'm like, I see people who have grown up in sailing environments, and they're like the people you want to have around in an emergency or when things don't go according to plan, because they're not going to panic. They're going to be like, all right, well, let's try this. Oh, that didn't work. Okay, we'll try this, because when you're in the ocean, you can't afford to give up. And so I was like, yeah, when I have kids, I want them to sail. I want them to be water people. I don't want them to not fear the ocean, but I want them to have a respect for it, but also have a respect and a confidence in themselves. And so that's what I'm most grateful for getting to participate in these voyages, whether the people around me are great or give me challenges. It pushes me to be better for everybody in my life.
Which is, oh, go on. Yep.
Can I add something here? The story of Lata, the ancestor of the Taumako people, who was also in their tradition, the first voyager, is most interesting around this point, because Lata builds his canoe. He realizes he cannot handle it alone. If he's going voyaging, he needs a crew. So he selects a crew, and he begins by selecting people who are obviously useful. There's a steersman, there's a guy who can handle the sheet lines. But then he also winds up taking a bunch of people that you might wonder why he would take aboard. He takes a thief. He takes a glutton. He takes a sexual predator. And what this really is a parable for, as Mimi once observed, every captain knows that you sometimes must take people aboard who don't do what you want them to do. This is a survival skill on a small canoe, which is a small community. Now expand that out a little bit and imagine that all the people in this room here are the sole inhabitants of a small isolated island. You might have somebody who is the best fisherman in the village, the guy that always comes and brings fish, makes sure that people who are perhaps too old or too sick to fish for themselves will not go hungry. But about once a month he gets really drunk and he beats up his wife and kids. Or maybe the woman who has the greatest skill in traditional medicine, whose abilities as a midwife have saved many lives of mothers and children, but you don't leave her alone in your house because she's a thief and she'll steal anything that isn't nailed down. This is the sort of thing that can happen in a small, isolated community. What do you do with these people? Obviously, you have to cultivate their skills that benefit the community and try to damp down on the antisocial behavior. It's the same thing in a canoe. You sometimes do have to take people that don't get along very well with other people, and you have to deal with that. The story of Lata is really, it's also a parable about all of us as individuals, because all of us as human beings are capable of great nobility of spirit, of courage, generosity, and we're also capable of stupidity and viciousness. And we have to come to terms with that in our own individual selves in order to grow.
Alison, your organisation works with youth. What impact does learning canoe building and sailing, navigation, what are the advantages of using that as a way of engaging with youth over, some other sports program or whatever, do you think?
Well, I think it's kind of like everyone in the world, we have to race and trying to battle against iPhone and that sort of equipments, basketball, volleyball. But it's a pride, it's a cultural pride. Because most of the kids that I'm involved with, well, not most, all of them, are actually at-risk kids, dropouts, kids that did not finish their schooling. So, so before the school actually started, my job was to help document the canoeing knowledge in the Marshalls, the canoe building, navigation. So we did that for over 20 years. And while we're doing that, we actually started the school. And bringing those kids, we not only bring them to educate them, we also had canoe races. And I think the advantage of having the canoe races is, and I took advantage of the atolls out there, because my program belongs to the chief. And in our country, chief is sometimes more powerful than the government. And we're still really respect them. So anything that you do, the chief have to know about it. So when I approached the chief and said, hey, why don't you get all the local all the atolls to get canoes to have a canoe race? He says, that's what we're going to do. So he called about the local governments on every atoll, says, build a canoe, have your own canoe race there, bring each of the canoes to the main island, so we're going to have the national race. And having that kind of activities going, the kids, especially the kind of crowd that I'm working with, they want to be part of something. So they see the canoe races, they see the acknowledgement of the best canoe races, canoe sailors from everywhere in the Marshall in one place. They want to be part of that. And we actually build canoes and put our canoes in those races and put the girls and the boys on those races to be part of even though, most of the time they lose, but the fact that they are part of a national action, it creates that I want to be kind of deal. So more and more kids want to be part of it. It's just like Olympic Games, but traditional Olympic Games. And using it that way, especially with those kids that are drop out of schools. They pretty much have nothing to look forward to in life. And involve them in that kind of sports. It create that, that I want to be that kind of situation. And it changed their life. And of course, it not just changed their life, but it changed the relationship between them and the parents, because sometimes there's a little friction between the parents and the kids. But those races are so big in the Marshalls that they're in the newspaper. They're on Facebook. They're everywhere in the media. So the father said, that's my son, or that's my daughter. Even though they did not win the race, but because of that kind of involvement through the traditional knowledge, it creates that special relationship, and kids want to be part of it.
Mimi?
I'm just adding on to what they're saying, but Teleki Kavea made the point about the story of Lata that, we asked, at different times we asked him, why did you bring that person along? Just like in the story, it's like you knew he was going to make trouble. Why? He said, yeah, and what if I leave him on the island when we're gone? Then what's going to happen? At least now, maybe he'll learn something. And the other thing that comes to mind is, what was it? Dang. No. Oh, gosh. No, sorry, lost it.
Well, in the hope that you remember,
Well,
I might just mention that Hotu has collaborated on a book. I don't know much about this, Hotu, but it's a book that takes the lessons from Waka captaining and applies it outside that world to, the world of business and so on. Do you want to just quickly say a couple of words about that, Hotu?
I hadn't planned to talk about it, but there's a book out there called Wayfinding Leadership, and different academics came to talk to me and said, we run these professional development programs for leadership in business and commerce and all of that kind of stuff, and they wanted to write this book that they thought might be a bit of a game changer in how people might think about managing other people. And so they came and spent a long time interviewing me, they'd been on a few voyages with me to see how I manage people and all of that kind of stuff. And then they wrote a book about it, which I didn't even, really, I didn't think that there was anything sort of rocket science about the kind of stuff that I was doing. Because at the end of the day, I guess the basic, my basic thinking around this whole idea of having people come on a canoe with me for a voyage is that at the end of the voyage, I want them to all get off the canoe and go, I want to go with that guy again. That's how we operate, because that's what I want them to feel. I don't want them getting off going, that was the worst experience of my life, and I don't ever want to work in a team with that kind of team again. So these were the things that people had seen, and so they wanted to do this little book. And then what's happened is that it's taken off, and it's in universities all around the world. People use it in all these business schools and all that kind of thing as a way of teaching alternative leadership methods. But I don't really come here to talk about it. It's, I'd come here to do Waka stuff. But,
Sorry.
But yeah, just, since Peter raised it, that's what it was all about. But I think, I guess, just talk about, taking people on the canoe that you don't want, or that, and it was quite interesting to hear that, that story about taking someone because they'd probably wreak havoc in the village if you left them there without any sort of, I guess, traditional leadership to control them. We've got old stories, voyaging stories of my ancestors who came to Aotearoa, and the talk is that during that voyage there were people on their canoe who were very, they're the kind of people that cause trouble on the canoe. Guess what happened? They got thrown in the ocean, and no one ever heard of them ever again, other than the talk of there were these, and we still have the names of those people that were thrown off the canoe because they were disobedient, they disrupted the crew and all those kind of things. But that's a traditional way of dealing with that problem, which you can't do now. And all we have to do is grin and bear it until you get somewhere you can take you off, plane, go home.
I'm guessing that bit is not in the book.
No, it's not. But it's not in the book. But if you take it to that level, that's when you start deciding, I don't know if this person should be in my corporation. And those things. But yeah, I just sort of threw that in only because that we have these traditions of how you deal with people like that.
Mimi.
I remembered, thank you. What I wanted to say is that Teleki Kavea's grandson, Luke Waikawi, who's the head of, who came home to be the head of things, he was the captain of the SV what am I talking about? The patrol boat Lata for the Maritime Police, and they train their crews. And the washouts from the Maritime School, the ne'er-do-wells, the slow and never do anything right guys. Luke said right off the bat, right from the start when he became a trainer, he said, give them to me. I want all the worst ones. They're my crew. And people were like, no, you can't handle that terrible mess. And he says, no, I want them. And he became notorious, famous for, he challenged those youths who had already failed at everything in their lives to turn around, to show people that they were the best, not the worst. And he succeeded through great leadership, for 25 years. It wasn't just a fluke one-time crew. So, yeah, there's stories either way. And some of the people here I know are aware of the Antarctic winter over that David and I did in 1982 to 84, and there was a person who before we sailed back after wintering over, we sent back on a ship because he was just too dangerous to sail with again. But yeah, it's a problem. And the cultural answer, according to Luke, is to not categorize them as criminal as we do in a culture, other cultures, but to recognize that they have some other reason for doing that. What is that? Let's deal with that. Yeah.
I should add that in the story wherein Lata takes aboard the glutton and the thief and the sexual predator, it has other analogs in other parts of Polynesia, and in some of those other stories, particularly in Tonga, those people become useful. They never figure out a use for the sexual predator, but the glutton and the thief come in very handy when Lata confronts an ogre who insists upon Lata participating in an eating contest with him. So, of course, he sends in the glutton. And then the same ogre, after having been beaten in the eating contest by the glutton, says, I want you to participate in a crab-catching contest with me. Lata is at this point on a voyage to try to rescue his parents who have been incarcerated at the end of the world. And the ogre is the key to him finding them. So they start off with the crab-catching contest, and the thief comes in very handy because he simply steals all the crabs out of the ogre's bucket. So, again, there's a lesson in that, although it's not in the Taumako version, but that, yes, maybe you take these people on board and you don't know what abilities they might have that might come in handy at some crisis point, as they did in this story.
There might be some creative crewing decisions made after this. So we've just got time for a few questions. So if you have one, please put your hand up. We'll get a mic to you. Over here in the middle.
Right, that's on. All of you guys here come from a great revival of these traditions from various parts of the Pacific. And I wonder if you could speak a bit about the reasons for the decline of this great culture that was rich and varied everywhere around the Pacific, and some of the specific reasons why it disappeared, whether it was early missionary banning of voyages or, do-gooder United Nations development projects with cheap fuel and boats that you see everywhere in the Pacific, and how in this modern age is this revival of culture going to be resilient to things like that and continue on as part of the world now?
So I'm just going to give you Te'aliki Kawea's answer because I asked that question very early on. And I said, was it World War II? Was it the colonial, the colonials confiscating ships, arresting people, and all the things that did happen? Or was it the introduction of engines and the need for money and all that? And he said, no. The reason it stopped is because during a period of time, the old people died who had the working relationships who had basically the family relationships, the inter-island relationships, and they knew how, they had the partners on the other islands. And then once that, that knowledge and that practice was, and those people died, then you have to start over making those relationships. That is the primary reason, he said.
I think that's a great one. And I think a part of our recovery of this practice is about re-establishing all those ancient connections, which we all try to do. So for me, when I first started doing this, I got to know Nainoa and Mo and a lot of my friends who've passed away now from Hawaii. And we established these really, really strong relationships. But what happened from those initial relationships was that I started rekindling relationships in other islands all around the Pacific. You know, so for instance, I ended up going to Bora Bora one time, and I ended up being invited to this gathering, and the mayor of Bora Bora asked me to speak. So I spoke in my language, and I spoke about ancient stories that my grandparents had told me about Bora Bora. And I talked about an ancestor in our stories who was the great-great-grandfather of, we call him Rata, but that's Lata in your stories. And as soon as I said those names, everybody knew what I was talking about. And suddenly I ended up with a whole bunch of other people that remembered all these old stories and wanted to talk to me about stuff. And then they started taking me to all these old important canoe sites and ancient temples and all these kinds of things, and started showing me all this stuff. And it all came about from old stories that we all shared, that are hundreds, maybe even thousands of years old, that somewhere in their memory, it got fired up when I started saying these names. Because really what I was saying to them was, this is my genealogy. This is where I come from. I come from these people. And even though these were ancestors of mine that come from way back in time, their names were still known to these people on these islands who our people hadn't sailed back to for 600 or 700 years. And so that's what I found during my lifetime sailing around the Pacific, especially in islands that have a kind of a Polynesian link. And so you heard the stories from up around Taumako. It's the same as in Vanuatu when we sailed up there. There's small pockets of communities there that their language has Polynesian traits. And so when I spoke up there and I was saying these things, and then they understood what I was talking about. And I think that's why I think what Mimi says is really, really powerful, because when you lose all those connections, you can't do stuff. You know, it's kind of like, it's like being a diplomat around on the ocean. You have to establish these really, really great connections and really, really great relationships with all these different people. You know, it's even while I've been here, I've been running into a whole lot of people, which I'm pretty sure that I'm going to end up having a kind of relationship with around maybe future voyaging, maybe future canoe projects, all these kinds of things. But those are really important. I think the other thing back in Aotearoa is that one of the reasons that we didn't really we stopped sailing back to the islands was that the land is pretty big compared to some of the islands that our ancestors came from. The land is pretty big, so there's not a lot of point in going and sailing back out on the ocean again and trying to find new land. Your new form of exploration is from the coast inland. And then once you start discovering all these new types of these huge trees and everything that used to grow in Aotearoa, and then you become inland water people because you need to travel up and down rivers and across lakes and everything else. So I've always called it a devolution from these big sailing canoes to changing to making a lot of flat water paddling and sailing canoes. And I think that's probably one of the big reasons as well for us that we stopped going on these big voyages around the Pacific. Our ancestral canoe, I believe, was because we have a space, and those of you who came to the talk on Friday, I showed a picture of where our story said the canoe's buried in this land here. And I think, we got to a point where once all the old people died who knew how to build that type of canoe, who knew how to maintain that type of canoe, to navigate it and sail all those things, once they were gone, the canoe just fell into disrepair. And then you get to a certain point that someone 2 or 3 generations later goes, well, the best thing I can do with this is to bury it in some sacred land and keep the memory of our sailing ancestors alive with these stones that I put there. And someone said to me, how come why would they have buried a canoe? What a waste of a canoe. Why didn't they just keep trying to fix it up and all that stuff? And I say to them, I drive around here now and people have got these $30,000 cars that something broke on it, and instead of fixing it up, it just sits there, rusts away, and all they need to do was a little job on it. It's probably good again, but they didn't have the person to do it. That's how I saw it, because people kind of think, oh, how bad is that you people didn't look after your canoe? I said, people still do it today.
Probably got time for one more quick question after that. Those 2 gentlemen together, sorry, you'll find out
I want to get back to your route finding in the night, and I guess it's mainly by the stars. And there was a reference to finding, most people know how to find south by the Southern Cross, but then do you transfer that to the northern hemisphere? You're going north, obviously, so to Norfolk Island. You pick a star ahead of you and follow that for a while, but the stars are coming and going below the horizon all night, so one disappears, you pick another one, and what if it's cloudy? Are you referring to the swells after that? You're reading a lot of the things about the ocean, right?
Yep. You nailed it. It's like what Alison was saying too, is that, for us, ideally you're going to have, you want clear sky the whole time, right? That's not going to happen. So your knowledge of, you don't need to know all of the stars in the sky, but you need to know where some of the stars that are important to you are maybe in relation to some other stars. So, it might be cloudy where the stars you're hoping to see are, but another star somewhere else will tell you that those stars are over here. So, but then sometimes you can't see anything. And so that's when you have to do what Alison was saying, and you have to feel what the canoe's doing when you're on course. And that's why for us it's pretty important around sunrise and sunset, because during the course of your journey, you know where the sun is going to rise and where it's going to set for your trip. So you need to have some of your better steers people on the helm during that time, because they're the ones that are going to feel how the canoe's moving across these swells. And you got to try and feel that motion, and you got to try and maintain it and keep that going. And hopefully through the night, some of these other things will pop up to give you a little bit of a hint. One time we sailed to Hawaii, and we were testing our navigator, and we were cruising along, and he came and sat next to me. He's going, "This feels the same, but it doesn't," you know. And I said, "Okay, what do you want to do?" And he goes, "I don't know if we should carry on sailing this way." I said, "Well, stop then. We'll just stop, and we just, hove to, and we'll just sit around for a bit, and we'll just see if we can," because we couldn't see anything. Couldn't see anything. And so we just lay on the deck of the Waka. We just lay on the deck. So we'll just keep looking just in case something happens. And for a moment, the clouds opened, and we saw the moon on its only half of it, and you get a north-south line from that, right? And so I was just lying on the deck. He was like beside me, and I just elbowed him and just pointed straight up. And he goes, "Yeah." And we were going off course. We were actually going a little bit. So because we use these big sweep oars on the stern, and we just swept the canoe around again. And we felt that same motion that we were feeling a little bit going the other way, but not really. And then we got back online again. But, just things like that. Sometimes you've got to just park up and just wait for something like that to show.
Thank you. That was a wide-ranging discussion, which I hope you found useful.